Welcome back. Tonight, we're stepping into a story born not from glory, but from stubbornness. Forget billion-pound transfers and Champions League nights. We're going to Anfield in 1892 when it was just an empty ground and one angry landlord. Before we dive in, take a second to subscribe if you enjoy these bedtime football stories. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see this game we love stretching across the world. Now, picture it. Everton have just stormed out. The ground is silent. One man's holding the keys. But he's got no team, no players, just a stadium and a grudge. And that is where Liverpool's story begins. Once upon a time, Liverpool Football Club didn't exist. The city already had a team, Everton. Before Anfield rang with "You'll Never Walk Alone," it echoed with Everton cheers. They played at Anfield, a modest little ground in the north end of town, and things were fine until money got in the way. Until one small problem: Anfield's landlord, John Holding, wanted higher rent. Everton said no. Arguments turned to shouting, shouting turned to walking, and soon Everton packed their bags and marched across Stanley Park to build Goodison Road. And just like that, Holding was left standing in an empty stadium holding the keys, with no team to play on his pitch. Most men would have sulked. Holding wasn't most men. Instead, he shrugged and thought, "Fine, if I don't have a club, I'll just make one." And so, in 1892, Liverpool Football Club was born. Not in a church, not in a pub, but out of spite, out of stubbornness, out of one landlord's refusal to be left behind. At first, they didn't even wear red. Liverpool played in blue and white, like a cheaper copy of the neighbors who'd left. But destiny was already stirring. The empty ground would soon roar. The club born from a grudge would one day become a global religion. From those fiery beginnings would come triumphs, tragedies, songs, and legends that shook football to its core. This is the story of Liverpool, the club that rose from a feud and became a religion. From a landlord's quarrel to the anthem sung by millions. But, of course, having a club and name was one thing. Having players to wear the shirt was another. John Holding had a stadium, but no team. For a moment, Liverpool Football Club existed only on paper, a proud name and an empty pitch. So he did what any determined landlord would do. He went shopping. He brought in players from Scotland, men nicknamed the Scotch Professors, who were famous for their passing style, less about charging straight at goal, more about moving the ball with clever little triangles. It was new, it was sharp, and it worked. The earliest idea was to call them Everton Athletic, a cheeky nod to the fact he'd just lost Everton across the park. But the Football Association wasn't having it. Two Evertons in the same city? Too confusing. They said the name was too close to Everton, which already existed, and would only cause confusion. So Holding had to pivot. That's when he reached for something even simpler, bolder, and more rooted in the city itself. Liverpool Football Club. So yes, for a brief moment, the club we now know as Liverpool almost spent its life as Everton Athletic, which, let's be honest, doesn't quite have the same ring when sung by 100,000 voices. Liverpool weren't welcomed straight into the Football League. Not yet. So in 1892, they started life in the Lancashire League, which was basically football's proving ground. Their very first game was against Rotherham Town. They won 7-1. A statement, even if the crowd was small and the world wasn't watching. A year later, they were accepted into the Football League's second division, and in their very first season, they won it. Promotion came quickly, as if fate was hurrying them along. By 1901, less than a decade after being born out of spite, Liverpool were champions of England. The red half of Merseyside was finding its voice, and 5 years later, in 1906, they did it again. 2 league titles before Everton could blink. The feud across Stanley Park was real now, not just about landlords and rent, but about trophies. And then came a decision that would shape Liverpool's identity forever. In 1896, they swapped their blue and white kits for red shirts and white shorts. It was simple, bold, unmistakable. Over time, even the shorts would turn red. And with that, Liverpool's image as the Reds was set. By the early 1900s, Anfield was no longer an empty ground. It was filling with chants, roars, and hope. A club that had begun as one man's quarrel was already becoming a community's pride. The empty stands began to fill, the chants started to rise, and the spiteful little club across Stanley Park was already learning a truth that would echo through history. Never underestimate the power of a grudge. But this was just the beginning. Liverpool were young, ambitious, and untested. Ahead lay wars, heartbreak, and glory. By the 1910s, Liverpool were no longer the noisy new kid across Stanley Park. They were a force. They'd already lifted league titles, and the rivalry with Everton was turning into something deeper. A split city. One half blue, the other half red, both convinced the other was entirely wrong about football, beer, and probably politics too. But then came the First World War. Football paused. The songs of Anfield were replaced by the sound of marching boots. Many players traded their kits for uniforms, their boots for rifles. Some never returned. When the game finally resumed, Liverpool came back swinging. In the early 1920s, they won back-to-back league titles, 1922 and 1923, 2 in a row. It was the kind of success that made Anfield feel less like a stadium and more like a factory for trophies. And yet, after that glorious burst, something odd happened. Silence. For decades, from the mid-1920s onward, Liverpool slipped into the background. They weren't terrible, but they weren't brilliant either. Like a band that had one great album and then couldn't quite follow it up. One bright spark shone through the gloom. Billy Liddell. If Liverpool fans back then had Spotify, they'd have had him on repeat. Fast, powerful, and loyal. He carried the team for years. In fact, they were nicknamed Liddellpool, because without him, they might have sunk entirely. The Second World War interrupted again. Once more, footballs gave way to bombs, and Anfield, like so many stadiums across England, fell quiet. When the war ended, football returned to a world that was battered, weary, but hungry for something joyful. In 1947, Liverpool delivered. They won the league, with Liddell leading the charge. It felt like a city's sigh of relief, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, football could bring light. But success is a slippery thing. After that title in '47, the decline began again. By the 1950s, Liverpool had slipped into the second division. Imagine it. The club that once defied Everton out of pure spite, now stuck in the wilderness, playing smaller grounds, their best days seemingly behind them. Yet, beneath the disappointment, the fire hadn't gone out. Liverpool was waiting, restless, for someone to light the fuse again. And when that spark finally came, It would change not just Liverpool, but English football itself. By the late 1950s, Liverpool were in the footballing wilderness, second division, forgotten by glory, their neighbors. Everton were smug in the first division, and the red half of Merseyside seemed doomed to memories of better days. Enter Bill Shankly, a fiery Scotsman with a voice like gravel and a belief as unshakable as the Anfield gates. In 1959, he took over Liverpool, and he didn't just want to win football matches. He wanted to rebuild the very soul of the club. Shankly walked into Anfield and took one look at the facilities. The training ground was a mess. The team's morale was worse. Some say he wanted to release nearly the entire squad on his first day. His standards were brutal, but they were clear. Liverpool would not settle for mediocrity. And then came Melwood, the training ground Shankly transformed into his laboratory. Passing drills, tactical discipline, fitness routines that left players gasping. To Shankly, football was simple. Work hard, play hard, never stop believing. But Shankly wasn't just building players. He was building believers. He looked at the Kop, the famous standing terrace behind the goal, and declared it the Spion Kop, after a Boer War battle where men from Liverpool had died. He saw the Kop not as a stand, but as an army, his army. He saw the Kop not as a stand, but as an army, his army. And soon that army began to sing. Week after week, the roar grew louder. It wasn't just a crowd anymore. It was a choir, a congregation, a wall of noise that could lift the players and terrify the opposition. Anfield was alive. Success followed. In 1962, Shankly led Liverpool back to the first division. In 1964, they won the league. 2 years later, the FA Cup, their very first. Shankly, grinning in his overcoat, holding the cup high at Wembley, became a folk hero. It wasn't just the trophies. It was the feeling. Liverpool weren't just a football team anymore. They were a movement. Shankly gave the fans language for their pride. The socialism I believe in, he said, is everybody working for each other, everybody having a share of the rewards. To him, football wasn't just about winning. It was about belonging, and the fans belonged. They wore their scarves. They filled the pubs. They sang until their voices cracked. Liverpool were back, and they were different now. Bigger, louder, unstoppable. He gave more than his life. He gave Liverpool their soul. Shankly once said, "My idea was to build Liverpool into a bastion of invincibility." And that is exactly what he did. The man lived for football. A reporter once asked how he wanted to be remembered. Shankly grinned, "I want to be remembered for being completely loyal, for being a man who always gave 100%. And if anyone ever remembers me as a good manager, then I'm happy with that. But I'd rather be remembered as a man who gave his life to football." By the time Shankly retired in 1974, he had built more than a club. He had built a dynasty, a foundation of belief, pride, and passion that would carry Liverpool into an age of dominance. Under Shankly, the Kop became the most famous terrace in the world, a wall of sound that could carry a team forward or crush an opponent before kickoff. But even Shankly himself could not have imagined how high and how far Liverpool would rise. When Bill Shankly retired in 1974, it felt like Liverpool had lost a father. But Shankly, in his wisdom, left the house in order, and waiting in the shadows was a quiet genius, Bob Paisley. Paisley wasn't a fiery preacher like Shankly. He was softer, quieter, the kind of man who'd slip into a room without anyone noticing. He had a miner's stoop, an unassuming face, and the air of someone who'd be more comfortable fixing a kettle than lifting a European cup. And yet, under that modest exterior lay one of the sharpest footballing minds England had ever seen. Paisley didn't talk much, but his teams did the talking for him. In 9 years as manager, he won 6 league titles and 3 European Cups. 3, more than Shankly had ever dared dream. It was ruthless efficiency dressed in humility. Where Shankly had built the fire, Paisley channeled it into a dynasty. Then came Joe Fagan, another quiet man, another club servant. He took over in 1983 and, almost casually, won a league title, a league cup, and the European Cup in his very first season. A treble achieved with less fuss than most men make ordering tea. And then came Kenny Dalglish, King Kenny, a genius on the pitch, adored in the stands, and eventually the man who carried the dynasty into the modern age. Dalglish wasn't just a player or a manager. He was Liverpool made flesh. Fierce, loyal, brilliant. Under his leadership, Liverpool were not just England's greatest side, they were Europe's. From 1977 to 1984, Liverpool lifted the European Cup 4 times. The red shirts became a familiar sight in finals, in parades, in the nightmares of opponents. Rome, Wembley, Paris, the locations changed, but the result stayed the same. Liverpool on top. The style was as unmistakable as the success. Calm, patient, and devastating. They didn't just beat teams. They wore them down, broke their will, and then struck with cold precision. It was dominance, but not arrogance, just a steady certainty, like the tide rolling in. At Anfield, the Kop roared louder than ever. "You'll Never Walk Alone" wasn't just a song anymore. It was prophecy. The red banners stretched across Europe, the silverware piled high, and Liverpool became not just a club, but a continental empire. At Anfield, the Kop roared louder than ever. "You'll Never Walk Alone" wasn't just a song anymore. It was prophecy. It was football's golden age on Merseyside. The grudge-born club of 1892 had become kings of Europe. But shadows, as always, were waiting at the edge of the floodlights. For every anthem sung in triumph, football has its silences. For Liverpool, the 1980s were both the highest of highs and the deepest of lows. On the pitch, the trophies still flowed. Under Dalglish, Liverpool remained the team everyone feared. League titles came as routinely as sunrise. The Red Machine was relentless. But in 1985, football reminded the world how fragile joy can be. The European Cup final in Brussels, Liverpool against Juventus. A night meant for glory, remembered instead for horror. At Heysel Stadium, crumbling terraces, poor policing, and the crush of fans turned disaster into reality. 39 people lost their lives. Football stopped. Europe wept. And Liverpool, though not alone in fault, carried the stigma of tragedy. English clubs were banned from Europe, an empire cut off from its stage. Just 4 years later, tragedy struck again. This time at home, April 15th, 1989, an FA Cup semifinal at Hillsborough, a crush in the stands. 97 Liverpool supporters never came home. Fathers, sons, daughters, friends. It was not just a football disaster. It was a wound to the soul of a city. Dalglish, Liverpool's hero, bore the grief as best he could. He went to funerals, comforted families, stood as a symbol of compassion. But the weight broke even him. In 1991, drained by sorrow, he resigned. The king had given everything, and it had taken its toll. On the field, Liverpool still won trophies. Cups here, a league title there. But something had shifted. The invincibility was gone. The golden age had ended not with defeat, but with heartbreak. Manchester United surged. Arsenal grew. Liverpool, once Europe's standard-bearer, now looked uncertain. The song still rang out at Anfield. The scarves still waved. But the empire was faltering, and the shadows of tragedy still lingered. The question was no longer, how high can Liverpool climb? But can Liverpool find their way back? The 1990s arrived, and with them, a new world of football. Sky Sports cameras, shiny Premier League branding, foreigners with strange haircuts, and money. Lots of money. For Liverpool, once the untouchable kings of England, it felt like waking from a dream, only to realize the throne had been stolen. Manchester United surged under Alex Ferguson. Arsenal sharpened under Wenger, and even Blackburn Rovers, yes, Blackburn, were winning league titles. Liverpool, they still won games, still lifted the occasional cup, but the empire had crumbled. The league title slipped further and further from reach. The Kop still roared, but there was an air of nostalgia now. Fans clutched old stories like heirlooms. Shankly's grit, Paisley's trophies, Dalglish's glory. Meanwhile, the present brought inconsistency, frustration, and managers struggling to recapture the magic. There were flashes of brilliance. Robbie Fowler, the god of Anfield, scoring goals with audacity and a smile that said, "Football should be fun." Michael Owen, baby-faced and lightning-quick, sprinting past defenders as if they were standing still. Steven Gerrard, a local lad, emerging like a spark in the darkness. Heroes weren't in short supply. Trophies were. The 1990s also gave birth to the Spice Boys era, a nickname born less from football and more from fashion choices and celebrity lifestyles. White suits at the 1996 FA Cup final. It was bold, it was brash, and it ended in defeat. The suits became a punchline. The era remembered more for image than silverware. Yet, through it all, Liverpool remained there. Always close enough to tease, never close enough to conquer. Cups came, yes, FA Cups, League Cups, even a UEFA Cup in 2001. But the league title, the one that mattered most, stayed maddeningly out of reach. Liverpool were no longer the standard bearers of English football. They were a proud giant, stumbling through a world that no longer bent to their will. The fans sang, the scarves waved, but the question hung heavy over Anfield. Would Liverpool ever rule again? And in 2005, on a night in Istanbul, the answer arrived. Not as a whisper, but as a miracle. Enter Rafael Benitez, a Spaniard with tactical precision and a knack for European competition. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't emotional, but he was clever. On May 25th, 2005, Liverpool walked into the Ataturk Stadium in Istanbul as underdogs. Facing them were AC Milan, aristocrats of European football, Maldini, Cafu, Pirlo, Kaká, Shevchenko, names that sounded less like a team sheet and more like a footballing pantheon. Within 50 seconds, Liverpool were behind. Maldini volleyed Milan into the lead before fans had even sat down. By halftime, it was 3-0. Kaka was dancing, Shevchenko was gliding, and Milan looked like gods. Liverpool looked broken. In the stands, thousands of Liverpool fans sang anyway. Some wept, some prayed, but none walked away. Across the world, televisions flickered with pity. Surely it was over. And then it happened. 6 minutes that defied belief. First, Steven Gerrard rose like a man possessed and headed Liverpool's first. He turned, arms aloft, whipping the crowd into fury. Come on! 2 minutes later, Vladimir Smicer struck from distance. 3-2. Hope was alive. Then came the penalty. Gerrard, charging into the box, brought down. Xabi Alonso stepped up. His shot was saved, but he slammed in the rebound. 3-3. In 6 minutes, Liverpool had clawed their way back from the dead. The stadium shook. Milan was stunned. Liverpool, carried by fans who never stopped singing, had turned despair into defiance. Extra time was agony. Jerzy Dudek, Liverpool's eccentric goalkeeper, threw himself into saves that seemed impossible, none more so than denying Shevchenko from point-blank range with an outstretched arm that felt touched by something divine. And so it went to penalties. Dudek danced on the line, a wobbly, ridiculous shuffle inspired by Bruce Grobbelaar 2 decades earlier. Milan's gods blinked, missed, crumbled. And then Andriy Shevchenko stepped up. He struck. Dudek saved. It was over. Liverpool, who had been humiliated at halftime, were champions of Europe. The fans sang louder than ever, scarves raised high. Istanbul wasn't just a comeback. It was resurrection, a miracle carved into football's mythology. Liverpool had been down. They had been doubted. But on that night, under the Turkish sky, they proved something eternal. Never write off Liverpool. Istanbul was a miracle, but miracles are fleeting, and reality always comes back. Rafael Benitez had delivered the unthinkable in his very first season, a European Cup, Liverpool's 5th. He was hailed as a tactical genius, a master of European nights. And for a while, Anfield felt reborn. But in the league, that curse lingered. Liverpool was still inconsistent, still stumbling against the mid-table sides while others sprinted ahead. Manchester United, Arsenal, and now Chelsea under Mourinho. They were setting the pace. Liverpool were chasing shadows. Still, there was magic in Europe. In 2007, just 2 years after Istanbul, Liverpool reached another Champions League final. Once again, it was AC Milan. The same opponent, the same stage. But this time, there would be no miracle. Milan got their revenge in Athens, 2-1. Liverpool had fought bravely. But destiny only dances once. Back home, Rafa built a team that could thrill and frustrate in equal measure. He found heroes. Pepe Reina, a wall in goal. Xabi Alonso, the conductor. Javier Mascherano, the destroyer. And Fernando Torres, El Niño, a striker who made Copetes dream again with every flash of blonde hair and every ruthless finish. And at the heart of it all, Steven Gerrard, captain, talisman, embodiment of Liverpool, a man who could drag the club by sheer force of will. Istanbul had been his night, but every season after felt like a test of how much more he could carry. In 2009, it almost happened. Rafa's Liverpool pushed Manchester United to the brink, hammering them 4-1 at Old Trafford in one of their greatest Premier League performances. Gerrard kissed the badge. Torres toyed with Nemanja Vidic, and the cop dared to believe. But consistency betrayed them. United still finished top, Liverpool second, close, cruelly close, but not enough. Behind the scenes, storm clouds gathered, ownership battles, financial chaos, promises broken. The Hicks and Gillette era turned Liverpool into a civil war. Fans protested, debt mounted, and Rafa's power waned. By 2010, the miracle maker of Istanbul was gone. The man who brought nights of glory and hope was pushed out. And Liverpool was slipping again, drifting toward crisis. Anfield was restless. The fans still sang, but the dream of a new dynasty felt further away than ever. But storms in football, as in life, often clear the way for something bigger. And Liverpool's storm was only just beginning. By 2010, Liverpool were unraveling. The miracle of Istanbul was fading into the rear view, and off the pitch, things were toxic. Owners Tom Hicks and George Gillett had promised a new stadium, new signings, and a new future. Instead, they delivered debt, lawsuits, and chaos. Anfield was divided, boardroom battles spilling into the stands. The chaos bled onto the pitch. Javier Mascherano, the midfield warrior, left. Rafa Benitez, the miracle worker, was gone. In came Roy Hodgson, a decent man but utterly out of place. His Liverpool were timid, lifeless, and the cop quickly turned. Hodgson didn't last. And then came a lifeline. In October 2010, Fenway Sports Group, the American owners of the Boston Red Sox, swept in. They bought the club, cleared the debts, and promised stability. The Civil War ended, but Liverpool were still rebuilding. Kenny Dalglish returned as caretaker, the king back at his throne. He brought pride back, even delivering a League Cup in 2012, Liverpool's first trophy in 6 years. But the league form wasn't there. Nostalgia couldn't fix everything. Dalglish stepped aside. Next came Brendan Rodgers, young, ambitious, a coach who spoke of death by football, passing, pressing, attacking with flair. For a moment, it worked. 2013. 14 was a season that burned itself into memory. Luis Suarez, Daniel Sturridge, and Raheem Sterling tore defenses apart. 101 goals. Football at full throttle. And Steven Gerrard, the captain, the heartbeat, chasing the one medal that had always eluded him, the league title. Liverpool came so close, so painfully close. Then came the slip. Gerrard's fateful stumble against Chelsea, Demba Ba racing through, the dream collapsing. Manchester City took the title. Liverpool came so close, so painfully close. Then came the slip. Gerrard's fateful stumble against Chelsea, Demba Ba racing through, the dream collapsing. Manchester City took the title. Liverpool's wait stretched on. The following year, the magic fizzled. Suarez left for Barcelona. The goals dried up. The defense leaked. Rodgers tried to reinvent, but it wasn't enough. By October 2015, with the team drifting, his time was up. And Gerrard? The captain who had carried Liverpool for a generation, who had given Istanbul and Cardiff and countless miracles. In 2015, he too said goodbye. He left not with a league title, but with the eternal love of Anfield. Liverpool were once again at a crossroads. The wilderness of the 90s had returned in new clothes, false dawns, near misses, heartbreaks. The club had tradition, history, and pride. But what it needed, desperately, was belief. And then, in October 2015, he arrived. A tall German with glasses, charisma, and a grin that lit up the cop. He promised not instant miracles, but a journey. From doubters to believers, he said. Liverpool's story was about to change again. When Jurgen Klopp arrived in October 2015, Liverpool were adrift. No league titles in 25 years. Istanbul already felt like ancient history. The club had pride, but it lacked direction. Klopp walked into Anfield and didn't just talk about football, he talked about belief. From doubters to believers, he told the press. It wasn't a slogan, it was a mission. Klopp wasn't polished, he wasn't corporate. He laughed loud, hugged harder, and swore on live television without a second thought. He didn't act like a manager, he acted like a leader of people, and Anfield responded. On the pitch, his football was chaos in motion. Gegenpressing, win the ball back in seconds. Attack with speed, with numbers, with fury. His first squad wasn't perfect, far from it. But they ran, they pressed, they fought. Liverpool had an identity again. The progress was immediate. In Klopp's very first season, Liverpool reached 2 finals, the League Cup and the Europa League. Both ended in heartbreak. But something had shifted. The team wasn't broken. It was becoming. Then came the rebuild. Fenway Sports Group backed Klopp's vision. In came Sadio Mane, the Senegalese speedster who terrified defenses. Mohamed Salah, rejected once by Chelsea, returned to England and became unstoppable. Roberto Firmino, not quite a striker, not quite a midfielder, became the perfect glue, a front three that defenders would see in their nightmares. Behind them, Jordan Henderson grew from understudy to captain. James Milner became the wise veteran. And at the back, Klopp solved Liverpool's Achilles heel with 2 masterstrokes. Virgil van Dijk, a defender who radiated calm and command, and Alisson Becker, a goalkeeper who turned panic into assurance. It wasn't instant. In 2018, Liverpool reached the Champions League final in Kiev. Salah was injured, Sergio Ramos, the villain, and goalkeeper Loris Karius endured a nightmare. Real Madrid won. Another heartbreak. But Klopp didn't sulk. He rebuilt. He told his players, "We'll go again." And they did. In 2019, Liverpool returned to the Champions League final. And this time, they won. Tottenham were beaten in Madrid, and Jordan Henderson lifted the trophy with tears in his eyes. Klopp had delivered Liverpool's 6th European Cup, and still, there was the league. Always the league. In 2018-19, Liverpool earned 97 points, the 3rd highest in English history, and still finished second to Manchester City. Agony again, but Klopp and his team refused to let go. The following season, there was no stopping them. Salah, Mane, and Firmino ran riot. Van Dijk was a wall. Alisson was unshakable. Anfield was a fortress, unbeaten in the league for more than 2 years. And in 2020, after 30 long years of waiting, Liverpool were finally crowned champions of England. Klopp didn't just win a title, he ended a drought that had haunted generations. He turned belief into reality. Liverpool were back on their throne, not as kings of the past, but as champions of the present. This was no longer a story about doubt or heartbreak or what-ifs. This was resurrection. Klopp didn't just win a title, he ended a drought that had haunted generations. He turned belief into reality. Liverpool's title win in 2020 should have been parades and packed streets. Instead, It was silence. A global pandemic meant that when Jordan Henderson finally lifted the Premier League trophy, it was in an empty Anfield, fireworks echoing over vacant stands. Joy, yes, but joy laced with strangeness. Still, Liverpool were back at the summit, and for Klopp's men, there was no slowing down. The 2020-21 season brought chaos. Injuries piled up. Virgil van Dijk's knee snapped in a derby against Everton. Alisson, Gomez, Matip. The spine collapsed. Liverpool fought not for titles, but for survival. Somehow, with patched-up lineups and late-season rallies, they clawed back into the Champions League places. Not triumph, but defiance. Then came the chase of a lifetime. In 2021-22, Liverpool hunted immortality. They went for everything. League Cup, FA Cup, Champions League, Premier League. They won 2 of them, both on penalties at Wembley. They reached another Champions League final, only to fall to Real Madrid again. And in the league, they finished with 92 points, just 1 behind Manchester City. It was breathtaking. It was brutal. 4 trophies in reach, 2 delivered, 2 agonizingly missed. A season of almost that would have broken lesser teams. The years that followed brought cracks. Injuries resurfaced. The famed front 3 began to break apart. Firmino aged. Sadio left for Bayern. Salah remained a superstar, but the golden trident was no more. Klopp rebuilt again. Darwin Núñez arrived raw and fiery, alongside Luis Diaz, dynamic and fearless. The team shifted, changed shape, found flashes of brilliance, but consistency was harder to grasp. 2022-23 was a stumble, out of Europe early, out of the league race even earlier. Klopp looked tired. Liverpool looked human. Yet even in decline, Anfield still roared, and Klopp still hugged his players as if love alone could carry them forward. And then, in 2024, came the shock. Klopp announced he would leave at the end of the season. After nearly a decade, the man who turned doubters into believers, who gave Liverpool a league title after 30 years and a 6th European Cup, said his tank was empty. The news hit like a thunderclap. Liverpool fans wept. The cops sang his name louder than ever. He wasn't just a manager anymore. He was family. A man who gave his soul to the club and, in turn, carried theirs. Klopp's farewell season wasn't perfect, but it was emotional. Every match felt like a love letter. From manager to fans, from fans to manager, he had given them everything. They had given him everything back. And when he waved goodbye for the final time, it wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the closing of a book, one of the greatest in Liverpool's long, turbulent, glorious story. Liverpool would go on. New eras, new managers, new heroes. But the Klopp years, they would be remembered like Shankly's, Paisleys, Dalglish's, not just for trophies, but for spirit, for belief, for making Anfield sing again. This was Klopp's Liverpool, imperfect, relentless, unforgettable. When Jurgen Klopp walked away in 2024, it felt like the closing chapter of an epic novel. He was more than a manager. He was Liverpool's heart. But stories need turning points, and Liverpool's next chapter had already written itself. Enter Arne Slot. Imagine a soft-spoken Dutchman armed with tactical precision, down-to-earth charm, and a laptop filled with pressing maps. He stepped into Anfield in June 2024, not to replace Klopp, but to build on his legacy. Slot arrived with a reputation, league and cup titles in the Netherlands, European nights with Feyenoord, and whispers that he practiced padel with the coaching staff. So yes, Liverpool nerd vibes. From his very first weeks, the old Liverpool identity was whispering again. Fierce pressing, intelligent play, unity. He was granted time, a 20th English League title sealed with a 5-1 triumph over Tottenham at Anfield. Slot's philosophy wasn't Klopp-style flash. It was quiet authority and belief in collective effort. He humbly credited Klopp's foundation and said walking through Anfield after winning the league felt unreal. The fans sang. Slot even skipped a formal awards night in solidarity with fans injured during the title parade, choosing empathy over ceremony. Performance numbers spoke too. In just 25 league games, Liverpool collected 60 points, placing Slot in rare company among the club's new coaches. Performance numbers spoke too. In just 25 league games, Liverpool collected 60 points, placing Slot in rare company among the club's new coaches. He made tough calls too, dropping Federico Chiesa from the Champions League squad to give space for young talents like Rio Ngumoha and Giovanni Leone. His vision was not just for now, but for tomorrow. By early 2025, freshly crowned, Liverpool were once again the team to beat. Betting odds favored them, and pundits tipped them to go all the way. For Arne Slot, it was history at warp speed. The Dutchman had delivered a league title in his very first season, and not just any title. Liverpool's 20th, drawing level with Manchester United at the very summit of English football. And as the trophy was lifted into the air, glinting in the Merseyside dusk, one truth rang clear. Liverpool were back on their perch, and this time they weren't planning to leave it anytime soon. But football never lets joy last untouched. No sooner had the confetti settled than news came that shook Liverpool to its core. Diogo Jota was gone. It was sudden, it was cruel, and it left Anfield stunned. A player in his prime, a man whose goals and grit had carried Liverpool through dark patches, taken far too soon. The same supporters who had roared his name now whispered it in disbelief. On the pitch, Jota was electricity. He wasn't the tallest, wasn't the flashiest, but he had a knack, an instinct for appearing in the right place at the right moment. A cut inside, a near-post finish, a header snatched from taller defenders. He gave Liverpool not just goals, but hope. He was the player who turned tight games, who kept title races alive. Off the pitch, teammates spoke of his quiet strength. No ego, no fuss. Just a professional, loved in the dressing room, respected by all who knew him. Diogo Jota was 28, married only 11 days earlier to Ruth Cardoso, partner since long before fame, a father of 3 young children. He and his brother Andre were on the road in Spain, heading to catch a ferry, doing what seemed ordinary until it weren't. A tire blew out, the car veered off the road near Zamora, crashed, burst into flames. Anfield went quiet in disbelief. The news felt impossible. The shirt, number 20, his shirt, became more than fabric. It became memory. The club retired it permanently. Across every level, men's, women's, academy, Liverpool said, "You will always be our number 20. He had returned married, full of hope. He had just helped Liverpool win another title. He was supposed to rest, recover, enjoy summer. Instead, the world wept. Tributes poured in from Lisbon to Merseyside, from teammates to rivals. Moments of silence held everywhere. Flowers, scarves, messages, Hundreds, thousands, millions mourning. The cops sang his name in unison, scarves held aloft, not just in celebration, but in mourning. His absence turned joy bittersweet. The cops sang his name in unison, scarves held aloft, not just in celebration, but in mourning. His absence turned joy bittersweet. His widow, his children, his parents, left with grief no title can heal. Yet Liverpool made space for grief. The fans sang, "You'll never walk alone," the louder, the heartbreak shared in the streets. Anfield, every memorial, every tribute, a quiet testament that some souls leave footprints no match can erase. And so, alongside the trophy, 2025 would always carry another memory of Jota, gone too soon, yet forever part of Liverpool's story. Titles can be counted, parades can be measured, but some voids can never be filled. Liverpool were champions again, yes, but they were also grieving. The red of that season wasn't only victory's color, it was remembrance too. Liverpool had their crown, but it came at a price no fan, no player, no family should ever have to pay. In grief, they found unity. In sorrow, they found strength. And as the cop raised their scarves in silence, the question lingered. How would this club, marked by triumph and tragedy alike, carry on into tomorrow?